Hey everyone, this is Peter Chawaga, your Weekly Bits podcast host. Before we start with this week's episode, I wanted to remind you about the upcoming Bitcoin 2020 conference. It's going down in beautiful San Francisco on March 27th and 28th of next year. Announced speakers include Bitcoin trailblazer Nick Szabo and skateboarding legend icon Tony Hawk. There'll also be a Lightning Arcade, Bitcoin-inspired art gallery, a ton of great content, and there's a lot more that hasn't even been announced yet. So to learn more and get your tickets, make sure you visit bitcoin2020.com. Hello there, listeners, and thank you for joining me for another episode of Bitcoin Magazine's Weekly Bits. This is the show where our editorial staff discusses the most compelling and timely stories that we're working on. For today's episode, I'm more than happy to welcome back Colin Harper. Colin is a staff writer and editor for Bitcoin Magazine, and he's always happy to come on the show. How's it going, Colin?
It's going, Peter. As you said, always happy to be on the show. And how are you doing, man?
I'm doing well. No one ever asked me that, right? I cue up the intro, ask you how you're doing, and then it's like just moving on.
Got to check in on the host,
I appreciate that. So I wanted to ask you on to this episode so we could discuss your latest cover story. So it's currently very big and bold on the Bitcoin Magazine homepage. It's headlined, BTCPay Server is Bitcoin's open source unicorn. So for any listeners that haven't seen it or had the chance to read, I really encourage you to do so. But there's a ton of stuff to dive into with that article for me and Colin here. But firstly, Colin, I was hoping you might provide some context on what BTCPay Server is and what kind of compels you to profile them for the site.
Yeah, so BTCPay Server is an open source payment portal for Bitcoin. And it was created by Nicolas Dorier, a French developer in as a direct competitor to BitPay, and actually with the express purpose to obsolete BitPay. So what happened was on Twitter, BitPay during the whole SegWit 2x movement, which if you any of your listeners don't know about SegWit or SegWit 2x, I would just Google SegWit 2x or No 2x Bitcoin Magazine. Aaron Van Weerdum had a lot of really good coverage back in the day when this was going on in 2017. But SegWit 2x was basically a conspiracy by a bunch of Bitcoin companies and miners to push an update without sufficient community consensus. And BitPay published a blog post essentially telling people that, if I understand it correctly from the blog post, I'm pretty sure it was basically along the lines of SegWit 2x is the real SegWit, and that if they upgrade to SegWit, the first protocol upgrade that expanded the block size limit, that basically there would be a vulnerability and they would risk not just having their funds lost, but also supporting a minority chain. And it wasn't a minority chain because the minority chain was actually 2x. So Nicolas Dorier commented famously underneath this is lies, my trust in you is broken, I will make you obsolete. And so he decided to start his own payment processing alternative to BitPay, which for those of you who don't know what BitPay is, it's a centralized payment processor. And BTCPay Server is entirely different. It's self-hosted. You have to have your own node to be able to run it. And it's just a really clean UI and UX for accepting Bitcoin payments. And they have, you attach it to your own node, and it'll have an invoice function. And also it has a tracker bar for if you're doing donations to see, or if you're accepting donations to see how much you've received and things like that. So it's like a plug-in-and-play type payment portal. And the reason why I like it so much is just because I think it's a really good testament to open source development and kind of the open source drive and ethos behind Bitcoin.
Yeah, and so to me, that whole origin story, kind of like the versus BitPay, and I'll also acknowledge, there's another side of the spectrum that argues, BitPay is one of the most critical companies to kind of drive Bitcoin adoption. They do super important work, but, there are definitely Bitcoiners, a segment of the community out there that has some issue with maybe some of their corporate values or definitely the SegWit debate. And I think everyone would agree it's always good for there to be kind of alternative services out there. Anyway,
right.
So the whole origin story, I think, really ties into what BTCPay Server has come to represent as a company and something that really rings through in your profile, sort of the DIY kind of community value ethos of Bitcoin sort of like is what BTCPay Server is all about.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's completely, obviously, it's completely open source and open for anyone to commit to and develop on if they want to. And just like with Bitcoin developers, the people working on BTC Pay, there's no central funding. They have donations, and they've received some grants recently from Cash App and some other companies in the space, like Wallet of Satoshi and a handful of others, and Async, the French Lightning developer. But these guys and girls are just contributing to BTC Pay because they love it and because they believe in it and because they see everyone else in the community contributing, and they want to be a part of something like that. And it really is interesting, and it's kind of why I decided to open up the article with Balaji. I'm going to butcher his last name. Balaji Srinivasan.
Sounds right to me.
Yeah, that's close enough. He said, as the decade ends, the biggest unicorn of the 2010s wasn't Uber, Airbnb, or Snap. It was Bitcoin, and then under that, he goes into basically talk about how he thinks protocols are going to start challenging companies for market dominance in certain spheres of the economy going forward into the next decade. And BTC Pay is not, it's not Stripe, it's not Cash App, but they have over 100,000 downloads, and they've got a lot of wind behind their sails, and it's really incredible to kind of see what Balaji is kind of pointing out here about these protocols starting to take up more significance, and some of these being open source protocols that communities can work on. I think BTC Pay is like a beautiful testament to this. Like, we're already seeing this play out in real time.
Definitely. And so I do want to take a quick aside and kind of address the unicorn label that's on this article. I think that if you Google unicorn, and there's definitely a segment of the Bitcoin Magazine readership who's, Silicon Valley adjacent, and will point out that the strict definition is a startup company that's privately held but valued at over $1 billion. So that's obviously not the case with BTC Pay Server. If you read the article, you'll see that a valuation like that isn't really even on their radar, something they would, target. So in what sense are you using that term unicorn here? And I'd go even further and say, what does it mean to be a Bitcoin unicorn? Nothing about a Bitcoin unicorn, in my opinion, we should redefine that. It shouldn't be a privately held Bitcoin-based company that has $1 billion. That's so not Bitcoin.
Right, exactly.
You know what I mean?
So if we're like using that definition, I guess the only unicorns in the industry are probably like Binance and maybe like Coinbase. Bitmain might be another one. I mean, an open source project doesn't really fit that label. And one of our head of content or content strategists, I don't really know what to call Dave Turner, but when one of our the higher ups at BTC
in an editorial meeting, it was pointed out that this didn't reach the Silicon Valley unicorn definition.
Yeah, but he said they're not the first open source unicorn because of this company called Red Hat. But I don't understand how an open source company could be sold. So that didn't really make sense to me. So to your point, redefining the definition, what I was kind of approaching at BTC Pay Server being a unicorn here was the idea what does an open source unicorn look like? And of course it's embellished because, BTC Pay isn't installed on iPhones and Androids and home computer systems all around the world, or even in merchants or retailers, right? But I think that the reason I chose unicorn was because I don't think that the success of an open source project like this really can be understated, especially when we take into account everything that's happened over the past year and the fact that it's only been around for 2 years. We've started seeing it deployed for fundraisers throughout the industry, for Tor browser, also Hodl or Not's legal campaign. The $100,000 grant from Square Crypto is huge. It's not a lot of money, but for these guys, I mean, that's a boon. And also the fact that an NFL player in Russell Okung decided to create cleats specifically branded as BTC Pay Server
That's
cleats.
unicorn status right there, man.
Yeah, right?
Who else can say that?
I just kind of felt like BTC Pay, I guess, had this kind of mythic significance surrounding it, and it kind of had this David and Goliath origin story. And what I was trying to highlight is the fact that, for an open source project to get this much excitement and development behind it, and a lot of people know BTC Pay Server, and it's being integrated in a lot of plug-in and play things like the Nodal. You can basically download a BTC Pay Server onto your Nodal home node if you have that plug and play service. It also had like a bunch of like, there are APIs now for like WooCommerce and Shopify and all these things that you can plug it into. And just to see this stack proliferate so much, I just thought that if Bitcoin has an open source unicorn that's not itself within its companies or within the entities like, operating on it and building on it, then BTCPay Server has to be in that conversation.
Yeah, for sure. And I think so I'm a bit of an editorial wonk. So this question might be coming from kind of at my own personal sensibilities and interests, but reading the article, there's a ton of interviews. I mean, I think you've got at least 3, maybe more team members from BTCPay Server. So
4, I think.
Yeah. So I just wanted to ask kind of what the process of getting that contact info was like. What media you use to kind of go back and forth with these people, and then like, how do you construct a story? I know they're all aligned, but you're getting essentially 4 narratives. How do you kind of like point that all towards a larger story that you're trying to tell?
Yeah, so I know I've been in contact with a lot of the BTC people for a while. Like I've kind of followed them as a sub beat for a while. I actually wrote a feature for them last year after it became a year old, and when Nicholas Dorier was still doing, wasn't doing most of the developing, but it was still largely like a lot of him driving a lot of the progress. And I had known others from, the Hodel campaign, because I was involved in launching that for his legal funds, and also just for the tour story that I did about 6 months ago. So I just DM'd them on Twitter, asked for emails, and then just sent a list of questions to them. And I knew when I was asking them questions, I had an idea in my head for how each member would kind of fit into the story. Like Nicholas Dorier is the progenitor. His questions were going to be a little bit different about, what was it like starting out? How does it feel to see it grow? All that kind of stuff. And then with Kooks, Andrew Camilleri, he recently tweeted about how he was going to have to quit developing and contributing to BTCPay Server because cash was really tight. And this dude had the second most commits next to Nicholas. I mean, this was more than a full-time job for him, right? This was like his life. And I thought that was really interesting, just kind of going into the idea, coming back to the idea of a unicorn. People think of unicorns as highly profitable. Well, BTCPay is not profitable because they're not generating any revenue. They don't charge any fees for the service. And then for the other ones, I kind of just tried to make sure that I asked different questions. But I definitely, in the narrative, I think the things that I focused on was its humble beginnings, the problems that, being a basically revenue-less, open source startup, like what that entails, and Kooks was great for that. Then I also kind of wanted to get the narrative angle of why are people contributing to this if it doesn't make them any money. I think that's kind of where you get some of the good comments from like Britt Kelly and also Pavlinex, where they're like, this has given me, like Pavlinex basically said, like, I wake up every morning and I feel like I have a sense of purpose. Like I feel like I have a higher calling at the end of the day. And Britt Kelly was saying how she just feels so inspired by the project and feels so warm around all of the people. And I think that was like one of my favorite takeaways is like, it sounds like, very exaggerated, but like they're a family and like they see each other as a family, which is really beautiful.
Yeah, and reading it, you definitely get your fair share of warm and fuzzies.
Yeah.
And the unicorn thing does come through to me at least. But I would also say I kind of came away wanting to ask you, how long do you think BTCPay Server can keep this going? I mean, as much as the developers sound 100% committed because, of the kind of community feeling it gives them and the work they're doing is important, it does also ring through in your article that like the business side of it is not like a Silicon Valley style unicorn that they're
it is not.
going to be running on this for years and years. Did you get a sense of the 10-year plan, anything like that?
No, I mean I think it's kind of like kind of like tie your shoes as you run type thing.
Yeah.
Make it up as you go along. I think the beautiful thing about BTCPay Server is in its current iteration, so long as people are keeping it up to date with the latest core releases, then, and like serious changes, like if something like Taproot or Schnorr comes into play, it doesn't really matter if they keep developing because the base, like the baseline product is there and it works and it can be deployed and it's been, it's open source and been copy and pasted, hundreds of times, thousands of times over. So I think to answer your question, it's really about how long they want to keep iterating. Like what new features do they want to add, right? Like, do they want to add like atomic swaps? Do they want to add some sort of like automated billing system? Do they want to integrate sidechain? Do they want to integrate Liquid? Do they want to integrate Tether? All of these other things where it's kind of the limits of the project are kind of up to the imagination and the drive and the work ethic of the people developing on it. I do also think that, I'm optimistic, but I think that Square Crypto's grant is like setting a precedent where I think, if you tell the community, it's like, okay, if you like these tools and they benefit you in your everyday life, donate. Or, the actual Silicon Valley unicorns like, Twitter and stuff like that. If you guys have money, because what's $100,000 to these people? What's $1 million, Eventually, I think some of these open source projects from, high profile and wealthy Bitcoiners will hopefully start receiving more funding that will keep them, keep the lights on. Whether or not that's a sustainable business model, it's not really, but it's not really trying to be a business too, which is the nice thing.
Yeah, I think it's the Bitcoin model in a lot of ways. It's not like there's not enough wealth that's been generated to go around, and people who are lucky enough, a lot of them, to kind of strike that with Bitcoin seem to have a good understanding of, the projects that kind of are going to be critical to the technology, right. And BTCPay Server, I think, fits that. So I just think it's one of the projects that's really cool, unique to Bitcoin, that something like this exists. You get a sense of the overview of the project, but you also kind of hear directly from some of the people like really behind it in your article. So I just think Bitcoin needs more stuff like this, and we need more articles like this. So thanks again, Colin, for coming in, answering my questions about that. Is there anything else, though, that you wanted listeners to know about this piece?
No, except maybe go to btcpay.org and smash that donate button. If you got a few sats, I think you can do. Let me check. I got my computer open right now. I think you do Lightning or on chain, but they definitely need more supporters. They've still got a lot of funding from those grants that comes in on a rolling basis. It's the people like developers at BTCPay Server that are really driving innovation and technology for this industry that is really in line with why Bitcoin was created. So if you like Bitcoin, you might like BTCPay Server.
I think you would. All right. Well, thanks again for coming in, Colin. Can you remind listeners where to see more of your work?
Yeah, so you can catch me on bitcoinmagazine.com, Colin Harper, that's with one L. You can also find me on Twitter. My username is Colin Harper. My handle is @AsILayHodling. It's not the band, it's the book. That's the reference. And you can also find me on YouTube or LipSync or Spotify, wherever we post our podcasts for the Bitcoin Happy Hour podcast. And as you know from listening to this, you'll find me occasionally on Weekly Bits.
And listeners can find my author page on Bitcoin Magazine as well, and follow me on Twitter @Peter Chawaga. That's CHAWAGA. That does it for another episode of Bitcoin Magazine's Weekly Bits podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll actually be off for the next couple of weeks for the holidays, so I'll see you again in 2020. In the meantime, please don't forget to leave us a rating and review so we can improve the show and help us reach the undoctrinated no-coiners. The Bitcoin Magazine Weekly Bits podcast is a BTC Media produced podcast on the Let's Talk Bitcoin network. Thanks again to my guest, Colin Harper. This episode was produced and edited by Graham Peterson and David Hollerith. If you're interested in reading the story we discussed or others like it, check out our homepage at bitcoinmagazine.com and make sure to follow us on Twitter @BitcoinMagazine to keep up with all the latest. You can find more engaging podcasts over at letstalkbitcoin.com, and you can follow them on Twitter @the LTB Network for all the latest episodes. Be sure to subscribe to the show on the Apple Podcast app, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcasts. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.